Hey guys, I don't want to be long here. I just wanted to, there we go, jump in and give you some tips while I'm over here in one of my kitchens here uh, that I use for spiritual work. So here's a tip I want to leave with you. Oftentimes when you're doing sweetening work, particularly sweetening jars and sweetening bottles, for example, and you have them in a mason jar, one of the enhancements of that is the adding the element of heat to the sweetening work, adding the element of heat. And so heat is a primary factor for a number of reasons. Number one, heat is a quickening agent in your work. So a lot of times you'll hear things like to speed a work up, you'll heat it up. As we know, even metaphysically, molecules that are exposed to heat, they also begin to move faster. All right. So one way to add speed to results is through heat. Number two, heat, like I said before, is a quickening agent, not only in speed but also in life. So as you know, if a person dies, they said, you know, their body was cold, right? The idea that heat represents life and movement and activity and dynamism, all right? And then thirdly, often and much more practically, oftentimes the elements in the sweetening jar are things like they're pretty thick. They have a pretty thick or pretty dense meniscus. Things like molasses, things like honey, things like maybe different types of syrups and so on. And so they are pretty thick and they kind of move a little bit slower. So in a more practical sense, the idea by the law of correspondence that if you heat up the honey, if you heat up the syrup or whatever, it will thin it out. And we know that if it's thinner, it'll move faster. It'll be a lot more liquid. All right. So some of the ways I've seen this done on social media, by Instagram and the other quote off quote online hoodoo communities that never really made a lot of sense to me, and I never advocated in any of my classes, was the idea of burning a candle on top of the lid. I just never was one for that. I was never taught that. That never made any type of sense to me whatsoever. The idea of having your jar covered in wax and so on, I don't know where that came from or who began that. That is absolutely foreign to me. And it's foreign to my logic because you can't sweeten a jar from the top down. I mean, even in cooking, we sweeten things from the bottom up, you know. So at the very least, I will say to my students, you can put little tea lights around here because that's actually going to add heat to the actual jar, Putting a candle on top of it, you may heat up the top, but there's nothing going on up there. Everything that you need is going on down here at the bottom. So my recommendation for that, if they're going to use candles, is put tea lights. I get these size right here, or these size, I guess they call them votive candles, and I set them around the jar. All right, that way as they burn, it'll actually begin to heat this part up, which is what the candle is supposed to do there. But here's a little tip for sweetening work. Because sometimes it can be a little time consuming, and sometimes the tea lights can even be a little bit more conspicuous than you would want it to be. So what you can do is have your sweetening jar just sitting on your stove, obviously not on the actual eye or on top of the burner, but in the general area. And that way, as you're cooking, as you're working, in the kitchen or on the stove, and the eyes are on, all right, the burners are on, rather. I'm using that southern country language. You call them eyes down here, the eyes of the stove. Anyway, the burners, it'll transfer that heat, right? It'll give some warmth to it, and that way you don't have to have a separate step to heat your sweetening jar. All right, you can have it in the general vicinity. Works incredibly well if you're cooking food to contact your target, and you have this sitting on there, and you're cooking food for them to eat and to trick them through their food. That's a good way. Also, if you're working things for the home to sweeten up the home, or you're doing different sweetening works for a location and you're cooking for that location, even all the more better. That's what I would say about just having it literally on your stove. Just set it and forget it, really. Right? The other thing is, if you want to have a more active experience with your sweetening work, but still doesn't take that day in, day out maintenance, all right, is this is one of my favorite things to do, the crock pot. My mother gifted me an old crock pot that she'd found. She does a lot of estate sales. You guys know my mother is an interior designer, so they do a lot of estate sales. And she gave me this this crock pot. It's a small little crock pot. I have the shell taken out. It needs to be clean. And literally, you can put your sweetening jars in here on a very low heat. All right, and I would even just keep the lid off. Okay, you can even keep both lids off. As you know, honey, it gets thin, so if you fill it up to the top, which I advise people not to, it may spill over if you're not careful. So you may want to take the top off, pour some of the honey out, and not keep this enclosed, all right, unless you have a very good mason jar that can handle high pressure. So those are some that's your Hoodoo help, some tips for sweetening work. And it's the lazy man's guide to conjure, I guess you want to call it that. But certainly, you can add tea lights around the sweetening work. Again, I don't see the logic in putting it on top. I don't really get that. I think they get that. This is just me extrapolating now. I think they get that candle on top from different traditions that work a lot with familiar spirits at a spirit altar or a spirit pot, in which you will set a light like a little white candle over that to illuminate the spirit's attention to it. And that's a sign that the spirit is currently working on that. But how that got into Hoodoo is anybody's guess. But I do see the logic in putting candles around there that'll actually heat up your well, there you go. It's Wickadoo. I'm not surprised. There it is. But yeah, the whole thing of just wax just everywhere, and you got to get it covered and stuff. Because my thing was, you want to take a little bit of the honey and add it to the food you're cooking with. But I don't. Anyway, so those are some ideas for you. Put it on your stove top as you're cooking. Put it in a crock pot, so you can kind of set it and forget it, and let the work roll on. And okay, let's click finish here.